Okay, so as part of the open back top sew along today, I'm going to show you how I do the binding for the back. What I do is I don't even really use measurements in terms of how long to cut. I cut a piece of binding that's 1.5 inches wide and plenty longer, than the scoop. Just gives me a little bit of extra to play with. And then what I do, especially because this is the Knit Pop Tri-Blend and it tends to curl like crazy, is I take my iron and I iron it in half, just like you would if you were creating bias tape. And then I iron that one of those bottom edges up to meet that fold. Okay, and I'm ironing it, this is the wrong side, this is the right side. And so then I take my open back top and I put it wrong side up, and I align the right side of the binding, it's hard to tell with this type of fabric, with the wrong side of the top. And I'm going to serge at 1/4 inch right along here without cutting anything off on my serger. You could also use a sewing machine with a stretch stitch if you wanted to. And I'm just going to tug on this binding ever so slightly as I serge it on. I don't want this to stretch out. I'm going to tug on the binding piece just a little bit. You definitely don't want to be creating any gathers, but I'm going to be tugging on that just a little bit. I'm going to serge that on all the way around the lower back. And then I'm going to fold it, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So I'm going to go serge it, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so now I've serged it on, and what you're seeing now is the right side of the top. I flipped it over. So I was serging the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the top. And then, so now I've flipped it over and I've folded my binding out. And so what you're looking at is the right side of the fabric of the top. This is the wrong side of the binding. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my iron, I'm going to press along here. If your fabric does not press well, if you're using some sort of knit that doesn't press well, yoga knit doesn't press super well, although it can take some heat from the iron, it just doesn't seem to hold a crease real well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this here, and then here's that fold that I pressed earlier. I'm going to press that in half toward the middle, and then this is going to get wrapped down and sewn down along that edge. And that's how I create my binding. I find that works pretty well. I don't have to worry about measurements. You can see I have a tail up here, that's the extra. I'm just going to cut that right off. But that's how I do the binding on the open back top for the lower back. So I'm going to go ahead and do that pressing and folding. And you can also, after you've pressed and folded, to hold it in place, you could certainly use pins if that's your preference. You can use also wash away wonder tape, which is really handy, especially if you have kind of a slippery fabric. That will work. Some people even use something like a fabric glue stick or even a washable children's glue stick. Those are options as well. And then you can stitch, use a stretch stitch. I mean, this part of the top in this case doesn't stretch a lot, so I wouldn't say even a stretch stitch is super necessary. You could just use like a 3mm stitch length on your machine if you don't have a cover stitch and you just kind of want to use your sewing machine to go along that edge. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so now I've pressed and folded, and I've used pins in this case going all the way around. So you can see there's a clean folded edge here. This is the right side of the top. The key is that you want to make sure that your fold covers the line of your sewing or serging right there. If you flip it to the inside, you can also see there's going to be a clean edge there. That's what makes the double fold binding different from a single fold binding, which is another option. But this provides a clean edge on both sides, and I think it'll work well with this fabric. If you had something super thick, you might not want to do a double fold. You might want to do a single fold, and that would be done a little bit differently, and I can show you guys a video of that if anyone's interested. So if you do this, if you sew kind of right along maybe like 1/8 of an inch along the inside of this edge, you'll end up catching the back too. Although if you miss a spot on the back, the way that we've done the binding, it's not critical because what's really important is that you get the front right there. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that with my machine, and I'll show you what that looks like when I'm done. Okay, so I've gone ahead and sewn that down, and in my case I used my cover stitch machine, so you can see the stitching along the back here. Not 100% perfect, but it's good enough for me in this top. And so I've just gone ahead and top stitched that, And now I'm ready to take my upper back piece, and you can do this a couple of ways. The pattern has you lay them right sides together, serge it across here, sew it, and then sew on top of here. The other option, which creates a slightly different look, would be to do a binding across this lower edge, just like I've done along here, and then to fully bind those edges, and then overlap them by the same amount that you would have done if you had done 3/8 right sides together. So overlap by that amount, since you would have binding along here, and then just top stitch along that area to hold the two together. And I think that that's what I'm going to do, because I like that look, but it is a little bit different than the pattern has you instructs you to do. So you could do either way, but that's how you would do the upper back. So that's all we're going to do for today, is just assembling the back together. And if you're doing a solid back, then you're good to go. You didn't really have any work to do today. There is an option for a mesh insert in the back, and I think that that would look pretty awesome if you have some mesh that you want to insert in the back, so you don't want it to be fully open, but you just want it to have some airflow back there. That's another option that's in the pattern too. All right, so let me know if you have any questions, guys. Happy sewing!